Okay, welcome once again. As the Hrant Dink Foundation, we are willing to talk about a series of discussions on different archives, and Dr. Boris Adjemian will be the first speaker for this discussion series. He's a director of AGBU Nubar Library in Paris. In 2011 in Paris, Nice, and in Napoli he got his PhD, and the fanfare of the king and the Ethiopians, the Armenians in Ethiopia is the name of his PhD thesis, which was published as a book. And by the way, 2 days ago he actually delivered a speech on this topic. Maybe you have missed it, but we will broadcast it again through our YouTube channel. So Adjemian will talk about the Nubar Library and documentation, analysis, and securing through publications of the Ottoman Armenian Heritage. So he will talk about his archive experience, and these series of archive talks will continue in January and February, and this speech is going to be broadcast live on the internet as well. So Boris, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Teşekkür ederim. Merci. So thank you very much for this kind introduction, Mehmet. But I seize the opportunity also to thank all the team of the Hrant Dink Vakfı for this invitation, for this double, even triple invitation. Actually, it was a 1 week invitation, so it was very, very friendly to welcome me, to make me come to Istanbul for the first time, and I had a very interesting time here, and I wish it won't be the last one. So thank you particularly to Ayşe Küçükkarcı for having everything organized so well. Also to Varken Keşişyan for having decided formally to send an invitation first last summer. And thank you to all the team. So I will give you a brief introduction on the history of the AGBU Nubar Library, which is, as you know, in Paris. The AGBU Nubar Library was founded in 1928. It was opened, actually, in 1928. The idea to create such a library, at the time it was not the Nubar Library, it was the Armenian Library, because there was no other Armenian library in France, so it was the Armenian Library in Paris, and it became the Nubar Library after the death of the founder, the leading figure, Boris Nubar. So Boris Nubar, as you know, was at the time in Paris because he came to Paris as the president, the chief of the Armenian national delegation, and he was also in Paris also as the head of the AGBU, the Armenian General Benevolent Union, which had been founded in Cairo in Egypt in 1906, and which had moved to Paris just after the First World War. In 1922, they built a small group of Armenian Korzarar, entrepreneurs, founded built the building where the library is still now. If I can jump to this building. I have a Moog, a mouse. It doesn't work well, I'm sorry. So, wait a minute. Actually, I think the mouse is frightened by me. Probably it thinks I'm a big cat, since we are in Istanbul. I will try with the English version. Yeah, the Nubar Library. It works. No, it's okay. Thank you. So this is thank you very much. This is the building of where the library is. It was built in 1922 by a small group of Armenian entrepreneurs. By the way, the architect too was Armenian. He was Levon Nafilian. He had worked in Istanbul, and he also is known for a series of buildings in Paris, including this one. And this is a view of the library as it is now. So, a few words about Hrant Andonian. Now, I have to mention him at the first place because Hrant Andonian, the well-known author and journalist from Constantinople, from Istanbul, who was arrested on 24th April 1915 and who survived miraculously to the genocide. Hrant Andonian was appointed the first director of the library. Actually, he was never appointed officially the director of the library. He never held the title of director, but he was de facto the director of the library. He was the one who organized the library, and he was the one who developed it from 1928 up to his death in 1951. So during this time, during these almost 25, 30 years, he contributed he gathered a lot of materials, including, of course, books, but also journals, archives, photographies, and I think we can say that the library owes a lot to Hrant Andonian, who gave its character to the library. So, what was the aim of the library at the beginning when it was created? Here, according to Hrant Andonian himself, who wrote who published a short notice, a short article about the library at the time, the aim of the library was to contribute to Armenian and Oriental studies, to the Oriental studies in the tradition of the Armenology, but also to be a place where Armenian intellectuals who were living far from their country, who were in exile, could meet, could gather, could discuss about important questions, together also with French intellectuals who were sympathetic towards the Armenian nation and who shared the same preoccupation for the survival of the Armenian people. And finally, the third aim of the library, according to Hrant Andonian at the time, was to gather what he considered as the archival documents that could sustain and legitimate Armenian political claims. The document which could prove useful, which could be useful to justify the demands, the political demands that the Armenians had at the time, and of course this was the time of the negotiations of the treaties after the Great War, and also this was the time when Armenians tried to recreate an independent Armenia, although they didn't succeed. But it was a time when there was still hope for this kind of things, and finally they never succeeded at the time. But the library, we can say, at the beginning had thus a triple or a double vocation, an intellectual and scholar vocation, and a political ambition too. So, for a long time, the library has had the role of preserving and gathering the heritage of the Armenian people, more specifically the Western Armenian, or even, let's say, the Ottoman Armenian heritage, which had been destroyed during the genocide, and the the leaders, the Armenian leaders who decided to create the library, like Boris Nubar, were had this deep consciousness of the necessity to preserve this cultural and historical heritage in a place, in a safe place. And at the time, this safe place appeared to be France and to be Paris, which was, of course, political and cultural at the time. That's why, for decades, the library became a kind of Armenian national heritage, especially in the French Armenian community. And I will talk about it later when I will talk about the evolution of the utilization of this library, because at the beginning it was mainly a cultural institution of the French Armenian community. So it was a cultural institution visited, utilized by Armenians themselves in France. So, but we are now in a new period when this library is more widely used by an international audience. So I will talk about it later. So you have to be aware also that at the time, in the 1920s, 1930s, there were some very important cultural institutions in the French Armenian community. There was first the journal Harach, the newspaper, the daily newspaper, which remained, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the only daily newspaper, Armenian newspaper, until 2010 in Europe, published in Europe. And there was also the Oriental bookshop, La Librairie Orientale, as we say in French, Samuelian, founded by Hrant Samuel, and which was continued by his son Armen and his daughter Alice. Unfortunately, as you know, they passed away in 2016. So the library, the bookshop is closed now, but this bookshop had a very important role in the cultural life of the French Armenian community. And there is no equivalent today. And the third cultural pillar of this cultural life of the French Armenian community was, I think we can say, was the Nubar Library. And now, because the Harach newspaper ended its life, because the Hrant Samuel bookshop doesn't exist anymore, sadly, we have only the library which perpetuates, the Nubar Library, which perpetuates this tradition. But the role of the library, of the Nubar Library, has changed during the decades, because at the beginning, as I said, it was essentially a library for Armenian people, for Armenian intellectuals. Also, it was trying to document the history of the massacres that had occurred that had affected the Ottoman Armenian people, and in a way it was sustaining the fight of activist movements who were demanding for recognition of the Armenian genocide after the Second World War in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. But gradually, the role of the library was transformed, and it became, especially after the 1980s, at the time when my predecessor, Raymond Kevorkian, for the first time a historian, became the director of the library, it became more and more a place for research, for scholar research. A place for research, and also a crossroads for researchers. So who are the researchers who visit the library, who use the library? There are ordinary people, I would say amateur researchers, who are interested mainly by the history of their family. There are also a good number of students and PhD candidates, a lot of PhD candidates who come to the library, so because they are working on an Armenian topic. It could be historical, musical. We have musicologists, anthropologists, different kind of scholars who come to the library. Also professional scholars and academics coming from universities. Also we have journalists coming to the library, journalists who are trying to find information, to get information about Armenia or about, for example, the genocide. So they come to us. And journalists, filmmakers, sometimes also artists. So it is very diversified. And finally, also I was talking about the international character of the library now, of its international dimension. I have to stress that it is not anymore a library for the French Armenian community. It is much wider than this. We have people from France, from all the European countries, Great Britain, Germany, Italy on the first rank, people from the Middle East, from Lebanon, for example, people from Turkey, more and more people from Turkey, and this is very encouraging. For example, people like PhD scholars, PhD candidates coming from Turkey who developed new skills, by example, the capacity to read Armenian, and who try now to use some of the materials that we preserved in the library, and also sometimes amateur researchers, amateur historians from Turkey also, who try to find information on their birthplace, on their village, information that they are not always able to find in Istanbul or elsewhere. People also from America, from the United States mainly, Canada, but also South America, of course from Armenia and other countries, very far countries like Australia or Japan. So it is very international now. So I would like to, this is for the general character of the library and a brief description of its history. Now I'd like to introduce you to the collections of the library. And in order to show that the importance of this center for Ottoman Armenian and diaspora heritage. As I used to say, the Nubar Library, the AGBU Nubar Library, is more than a library, and it is more than a library for many reasons. Of course, it is a library because it has books. These books, a good part of these books originally came from Istanbul, because they were donated by rich Armenians who had personal collections and who gave their collections to the library, to the young library in the 1920s, 1930s. So today we have about 43,000 printed books in the library. 43,000. It is a lot and it is not a lot. It is not a lot, of course, if you compare to a national library or a university library. But if you compare to an Armenian institution in the diaspora, it is not neglectable. It is something quite important. Among these 43,000 printed books, we have a lot, really a lot, of editions from 19th century Constantinople, Izmir, Venedig, and Vienna, of course, also Amsterdam, all the important intellectual centers of the Armenian world of the 19th, late 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. We have several hundreds of manuscripts too, but it is not the main part of the book collection. An important part of the book of the printed materials is made of the newspapers. For the printed press, Mamule, the Nubar Library is very rich. It is less rich, I think, than the Vienna Mkhitarist Library, which has an extensive collection of Armenian newspapers of about, I think, 2,000 titles, 2,000 periodicals. Ours is about 1,500 titles, of which 1,086 exactly are printed in Armenian, others in foreign languages. And, but it is a very important collection because a lot of these newspapers were printed in the Ottoman Empire between, let's say, 1860 and the new Turkish Republic in the 1920s. So during these 60 years, we have a lot of Armenian newspapers which were printed, and we have the call in Bolis, for example, in Istanbul, and we have a lot of collections complete at the library. Not only in Armenian, by the way, but also printed in Hayadar Turkeren, that is to say in Turkish, but with Armenian printed characters, Armenian alphabet. So this collection of newspaper is very important, with titles like Jamanag, Verchin Lur, Norgyank, Veradzenund, Arevelk, Pusantion, Mamul, Zarig, etc. The list of the newspapers, by the way, is accessible here. You have a list of the periodicals. Only appear here the periodicals in Armenian. You have an access, you can download the list, of course. I am sorry, for the time being, no, it is not like this. I want to quit this. Yeah. For the time being, there is no digitized catalog of the library. We are just starting a digital catalog of the library. So it means that if you are looking for a specific book, you have to ask us. And so we are happy to answer. But the library was working in a very traditional way for a long time, avant Tagan Sevov, I think. And we are trying to modify this and to modernize it, of course, with our modest means. Hamest by Mannerov. Among these periodicals, so we have an ambitious project of digitization of the periodicals, but every ambitious project has to start with very modest steps, and we only, for the time being, we only digitized, and it doesn't work here, I don't know why, don't ask me why, it should work. We have only digitized the full collection of the journal Renascence. Renascence is an interesting case because it was published by Armenian people in between the end of the year 1918 to spring 1920. So in a very, in Istanbul, in a very specific period, of course, because it was the end of the war, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and it was the period when were prepared the trials for the former Young Turks leaders. So in this period, this newspaper published a lot of information regarding the preparation of these trials, regarding the investigation commission. And since this newspaper was printed in French, it is very appreciated by a lot of scholars now who are interested by this period, but who can't read Armenian. And the fact is that, as far as I know, there is only one collection complete in Europe, which is our collection. I know that Vienna has its own collection, but I'm not sure it is complete. And I have been told that in the US or in Istanbul, it is not available. So this is a journal, an example of a journal that you could you could have an access to through the website if it works, but tonight it doesn't work. Okay, so you will have an access tomorrow, of course. Of course, we want to enrich slowly slowly or quickly, I don't know, as quick as we can, the possibility to read other journals. Oh yeah, it is very long because of the connection here. These files are quite heavy, so you have to be a bit patient unless you have a good internet connection at home. So last words about this newspaper collection. It is important because they show they underline the fact that the library is not only an Armenian library, it is more specifically a library regarding the former Ottoman Armenian world and also the heritage of the Armenian diaspora. If you have a look on the titles, you realize that 80% of them were printed in the Ottoman Empire or in today's Turkey or in the diaspora. And I could give you a list, but I won't, but on all the titles, on the 1,086 titles I mentioned, yes, I don't have the numbers here, I think it is about 250 published in Istanbul or other towns of Turkey, or the former Ottoman Empire. There are 124 that were published in Paris, 112 in Yerevan, 79 in Cairo, 74 in Beirut, a lot of, about 40 in New York, about 31 in Alexandria, Egypt, and the like. And so we have also newspapers published in Iran, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Romania, in Bulgaria, even in Ethiopia, in a wide range of different places. So I was saying that the Nubar Library is more than a library, also because it preserves archives. So by definition, the archives are unique documents. This is why they are not the same than the printed documents, like the newspapers or the printed books. By definition, they are unique. So we have a lot of archives, about 500, 600,000 documents. We can globally say that there are four main collections of archives in the Nubar Library. The first one is the Andonian collection. The second one are the archives of the Patriarchate of Istanbul. I think I have to explain why. The third one are the archives of the Armenian National Delegation, as you can see. And the last one are the archives of the AGBU. So I will say a few words on every of them. So the Andonian collection first. Does it work? Hope it will work. Yes. So the Andonian collection, we call like this. A lot of documents are included in this collection, but the most important part is made of the testimonies on the genocide, testimonies of victims and survivors of the genocide that were gathered after the war and on a period of about 30 years by Hrant Andonian. And he compiled all these documents in various files that he named indicating the origin of the people who had expressed these testimonies. So, for example, you can have an access on, to all of these files. For the time being, the collection is not complete online, but it will soon be entirely available online. Also, if you go tonight on your internet at home, you will see that most of them are the digitized pictures from a microfilm, so the quality is not very good and it is not very beautiful like as such, but we will soon digitize it in a better way and put it entirely on the website. So I'm sorry, but today it won't open. It won't. I'm sorry. Yeah. Actually, I had brought my computer because I knew that the connection was not so good, but we have a problem of connection also with my computer. So anyway, I'm sorry. So the Patriarchate, the archives of the Patriarchate of Istanbul. So there is a list of the archive of the Patriarchate of Istanbul, which is downloadable. The same for the Andonian archive. You have a list which is accessible. These archives, here these are only samples. Not all the archive is digitized, only samples. You have correspondences of the Patriarchate, correspondences which might be correspondences with the embassies, the European embassies, correspondence also from the Patriarchate with the Armenian prelacies in the different towns of the Ottoman Empire, with the Araçnot-Taranner, with the bishops, and you have also correspondence, specific reports about the massacres of the Hamidian period. And also, you have materials such as the census of 1913-1914. This is the global census of the Ottoman Armenian population, which was made by the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul just before the war. Of course, the Ottoman Armenian Patriarchate was ignorant of the fact that 1 or 2 years later there will be a genocide. So this source has something very important, of course, historically, and you can have an access to it, to samples of this source. We have not digitized everything. We will. And you can, it gives you an idea of what you might find at the library as, as documents. So all these, you can also, of course, enlarge the size of the documents and zoom in the documents. It is in a good quality. You can zoom as well as you want. Yes, and I wanted to talk also. So why are these archives of the Patriarchate of Istanbul in Paris now? I think it's an important question. So these archives were sent to Europe, to Manchester, just before the occupation of Istanbul by the Kemalist forces at the end of 1922. And this documentation by the Patriarchate was had a very sensitive character, because a lot of materials had been gathered by the Patriarchate just at the end of the war, therefore after the genocide, when the British and the French occupied Istanbul, and when Zavenier Yayan, who had been exiled by the Young Turks, by Talat Pasha, had a chance to go back to Istanbul. They opened, the Patriarchate opened a Deregadu Divan, a bureau of information, in order to collect as much as possible documents on what had happened against the Armenians during the war. And this collection, of course, had a very sensitive importance, and they didn't want that the Kemalist forces could put an end on this documentation. So at the eve of the Kemalist occupation of Istanbul, they sent all these materials to Manchester, where there was at the time a wealthy Armenian community. And from there, the materials were sent with Bishop Grigoris Balakian, a survivor of the genocide himself, to Marseille, where he had been appointed as the new bishop. And from then, from Marseille, the materials were sent to Paris, where they remained in the Nubar Library. They remained up to now, except the specific part which regarded specifically the years of the First World War, because Zavenier Yayan, the Patriarch, was again exiled in 1922-23. He was again exiled in Baghdad, and from there he asked for the repatriation of these documents to Jerusalem, to the Armenian Patriarchate of Jerusalem, so that he could have an access to them in order to write his biography. I think it is mentioned in his memoir that he used these materials only for 3 days, but nevertheless the materials remained in Jerusalem, where they are now still today. The problem with the dispersion of the materials is not the dispersal of the materials. The dispersal is not a problem as such. The problem is the access to the materials. A lot of Armenian institutions in the diaspora have archives, but the access to them is not always granted. So I always, not always, but I often have to say that Armenians used to complain about the inaccessibility of some Turkish official documents, which is true. But in the meantime, it is difficult for a lot of scholars to have an access to Armenian archives, archives of some political parties, or archives which are preserved or held by ecclesiastic institutions, like in Venedig or in Jerusalem. So the importance of the Nubar Library is, again, underlined by the fact that this library is open and it welcomes all the researchers, be they amateur researchers or professional researchers, be they Armenian or Turkish or whatever, and they can have an access to the documents, and the policy of the library is to provide an access as wide as possible to these documents. I have also to mention very briefly the archive of the Armenian National Delegation. Again, on the website you will find only samples of them, and the archives of the AGBU. The archive of the National Delegation are not completely in Paris. Some of them, they were all in Paris at the beginning, but some of them, I think the majority, was sent to Armenia in the 1970s for some reasons I could explain, but I have no time, if you like, later. And so we kept at the library only a minority of this documentation, but it is an important minority of these correspondences. So it is often consulted, often read by historians who work on the years, on the post-war years. And these materials are mainly in French and English. Also, there are the archives of the AGBU. Not all the AGBU archives, since there are three important spots for the archives of the AGBU, the Armenian General Benevolent Union. First, Egypt, Cairo, where there was the executive committee of the AGBU who remained even after the war to organize all the orphanages and the schools that were created for the survivors of the genocide after the war in countries of the Middle East, like Syria, like Palestine, like Lebanon, of course, like Greece also, Cyprus, for example. And also, so in Paris, we have the archives of the Central Board, not the archive of the Executive Committee, the archives of the Central Board. The Central Board of AGBU remained in Paris from 1918, I think, approximately, up to 1940. When the Germans invaded France, the Central Board moved to America, where it is still today. It explains that after 1940, the archives of the AGBU are in America, not in France. But for the interwar period, even from the creation of the AGBU in 1906 up to 1940, the archives of the Central Board with all the correspondences are in Paris. So it is a very important documentation for those who are interested in some aspects of the genocide as the consequence of the genocide and the organization of a philanthropic and humanitarian action by Armenian organizations such as the AGBU after the war. And this kind of documentation allows historians to follow day by day, almost day by day, this philanthropic and humanitarian action towards the survivors of the genocide. So, and I was saying that the library is not only a library because we have also a lot of visual materials, which are essentially photographs. A good part of them have been digitalized, and is now accessible through this map. So you have a list on the left side, and for example, if you click on the Aleppo file, you should open, yeah, it opens, the Aleppo file. So there are about 200 photographs of Aleppo. So what do we have in this photograph? Sorry for the quality, but I think it can be enhanced easily. It is because of I don't know, but it is a technical reason which is proper to the Hrant Dink Foundation. The reproduction of the photo is very good, so you can enlarge them. The quality is still very good. You can use them freely for example, in schools. You can display them in conferences. It is quite easy and not difficult to open generally. And so you have which kind of views of photographs. You have photographs mainly of survivors. Again, these this photograph collection comes from the AGBU archives. It is part of the AGBU archives. So it is documenting mainly the action of the AGBU after the war, the construction of new building, the gathering of the survivors, even the groups which were organized to go to Bedouin tribes in Syria or Iraq or whatever to pick up the orphans or the young women who had been kidnapped during the genocide. These kind of photographs are included in the collection. So you have photographs of a lot of different places of the former Ottoman Empire and also of the diaspora. So, I think I have been long enough, but I didn't finish. So you tell me when I have to cut. Huh? Don't worry to cut. Sorry. Bon. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was saying that the library is more than the library also because it is a place for research where researchers meet each other, exchange ideas, knowledge, but also a place where knowledge is, we create knowledge also through publications. So some of these publications are available online, some others are not. You might find this journal online. This journal is an academic journal that we publish now from 2013. It is a peer-reviewed academic journal, a multidisciplinary journal, so with articles in history, anthropology, sociology, political science, and the like, about aspects of Armenian problems, let's say, a lot of articles on the genocide, mass violence, memories, immigrations, diaspora, and the like. Also, it is a journal which is not specifically an armenological journal. It is more than that. It is a comparative journal, so we often have also questions that are addressed by scholars of other fields than the specific Armenian field. And this journal is available online through through a website on a platform gathering hundreds of academic journals. Études arméniennes contemporaines. Yeah, it is not only a French-speaking journal. It is published, it is published in French and in English. So some of the issues are almost completely in English. It depends of the issues. By the past, the library had also published a lot of different journals and a lot of books, like this one, mainly through the efforts of my predecessor, Hrant Dink, who in a way prepared the path to the publication of his masterpiece on the history of the genocide in 2006 and with the translation in English in 2011. So he had published previously a few volumes on the second phase of the genocide, Mardin in 1915 and the like. And also Boris Adjemian and Hrant Dink published this general history of the Armenian General Benevolent Union in 3 different languages, French, English, and Armenian. It was in 2006 for the centennial of this organization. So we have a lot of publications, and also we organize or co-organize events like conferences. for example, we co-organized with the help of the Kalous Gulbenkian Foundation in 2014 an academic conference, international conference in Jerusalem, which was called The Making of Jerusalem, Spaces and Communities, something like that. And so we gathered a good number of scholars in Israeli studies, Jewish studies, Arab studies, and the like, and of course Armenian studies. And we published the proceedings of this conference last month through the journal Études Arméniennes Contemporaines that I've just mentioned earlier. Also, we continue to organize conference or to contribute to conference, and we organize exhibitions. So the last one was Armenia 1915, which was organized in 2015 during the centennial of the genocide, and which was held in the hall of Paris City Hall. So it was a very important exhibition on the genocide, and we decided to publish on the website a kind of catalogue of the exhibition, so you can have an access to almost all the text and almost all the documents of the exhibition, this exhibition on the genocide. Be aware that this exhibition was I think, the most important exhibition organized on the issue of the Armenian genocide in Europe, and it has no equivalent. And so we decided to try to create a tool which might be useful for students, accessible for teachers in secondary schools. So it is really in this kind of spirit that we gathered informations and documents in this virtual exhibition. So yeah, in principle, all the pictures, you can open them, enlarge them. There are also maps that also can be enlarged. And there are also videos. I think I will show you one, just to illustrate my talk. Yes, this one. It's a general map of the massacres and deportations in the Ottoman Empire, which was exhibited, so which was shown in this exhibition. And on this map you can see the roads of the deportation, you can see the location of the sites where the deportees were slaughtered on the road to the deportation, also the sites of the camps in Syria, in Mesopotamia, and the like. And the same in the same video you have are also displayed photographs of the genocide which were taken by German and Austrian officers during the war, like Armin Wegner. Of course, you know, you are already aware about it. So I think I will finish here, just saying that we have a lot of projects in Armenia, in France, and also with diaspora institutions. We already work with several diaspora institutions for a long time, like the Gulbenkian Foundation, of course, like the Hushamadian project in Berlin. We are trying to connect also our activities to the Haigazian University in Beirut, and we are starting now to a collaboration with the Hrant Dink Foundation, I hope, Foundation, and I hope this first step will be followed by future collaborations. And I thank you very much for your attention.